Hello, welcome to Paint by Blunders. Today we are looking at the Chaos Space Marines and more specifically the Night Lords and how we can get them looking nice and striking on the table and also pretty quick at the same time. We will be taking advantage of contrast paints and an airbrush mainly to get the blues down for the armour, but you don't have to do this. You can use a paintbrush, but it would take slightly longer. Also, we're going to be using a oil wash later on. Again, you don't have to, but I'm a huge fan of oil washes and I do think they look incredibly effective and do save a lot of time. Now, enough of me waffling, let's get to the video. Primed our lovely little Night Lord. All I've done is prime him in black primer with an airbrush, and I'm just going to come in now with the airbrush again. This is the Galeri Mobius 2.0, which they kindly sent me, and I absolutely adore this thing. And I'm just going to come in with some white ink and I'm just going to add some sort of volume highlights, nothing too strict. I'm just trying to really highlight the areas that I want to add a bit of interest, and just to add that nice tone, because when we come in with a contrast in a minute, you'll see it makes such a cool difference and it's super fast. I think if I did a Space Marine army, I would do the entire army like this now. And I'm just picking up the corners and just things I want to be nice and bright. So once that's done, Talasar Blue, the contrast paint, whacked it in the airbrush, and I'm just going to do 2 coats of this. But even if you do 1, look how bright that looks over it and how effective it looks just going over that white. Now I'll be putting 2 coats over just to make it a little bit darker, but I really like this using the contrast for an airbrush to really quickly glaze over the miniature. Like, the entire armour is done for how I want these to look in 5 minutes, if that. I just want to show you how it looks on an Ultramarine as well, because I think it's a great way for Marines. Obviously you could do this with any of your Marines, you know, just adjusting the contrast paint to suit the tone you want, whether it's Blood Angels, Salamanders, Dark Angels, etc. But it's a really quick and effective way with an airbrush to really just get them standing out on the table. Next up, the Endless Trim. I'm going to be using Runelord Brass and knocking in a 1/3 of Hachette Copper. I think I said that right. Chances are it's completely wrong. Coverage on this isn't the best, so I will be adding 2 coats to this. And be warned, if you've not painted Chaos Space Marines before, this does take a while. I did question all my life choices whilst painting this. After mentally scarring myself on the sheer amount of trim, I needed an easy win, so I'm going to use Black Legion to paint the undersuit of his armour. Unfortunately, that was incredibly short-lived and I'm back to metallics. I'm going to be using Thrash Metal from Scale Colour. It's quite a nice silver, but it doesn't really matter. Use whatever one you like. I would go slightly on the brighter side just because where I'm going to be putting an oil wash on this guy later, it really dulls it down. So I find a slightly brighter silver works better. But if you want him looking dirtier and grimier, then by all means use a nice dark metallic. So a nice quick easy win for his Night Lord sigils. I'm going to use Tuskor Fur for this. You could easily, if you wanted it more red, just go with the whole corn red and you know, Mephiston red combo, but I wanted it slightly on the pinker side to try and complement that sort of slightly electric blue. Once that's done, we're going to start looking at some of the smaller details that I'm going to use. German Grey from Vallejo Model Colour. You could just use Esching Grey from Games Workshop. So it's for things like belts, holsters, any loose cable. You can obviously jazz these up, make them really cool, make the cables all chevrony, etc. But for me, it's about the armour and the gold and just looking quite striking from a distance. So with all of the major colours blocked in, we're now at the stage where I'm going to put an oil wash on them. For anything that I do that's like speed or army painting to get it on the battlefield, I always try to find a wash that I can pretty much lazily cover the whole thing. That for me saves me a mountain of time and oil washes I think are perfect for that. And I am going to use Van Dyke Brown, which is a gorgeous brown. Obviously it's in the name, but it also, this particular one almost has like a purple hue to it, which is going to go really well against the blue armor. And I know what some of you might be saying, Dan, obviously I don't have that. That's quite out there. That's, you know, not the normal thing you'd find on a hobby shelf. You could absolutely easily use my favourite, which is Streak and Grime, the one bottle does all. That will do you just fine. I would just take a lot more off the armour when it comes to removing the oil. But as I always say, I try to get everyone into using oils as much as possible. I think they are fantastic and I think they're time saving. Yes, they're a little bit stinky, but they are fantastic. For those of you who are watching this and have never used oils, very simple. If you're using pure oils like I just have, a little bit of spirit. In this case, I use Winsor & Newton's own artist spirit. Very cheap from the Range or Hobbycraft. If you're in the UK, you can pick up a litre of it for about £7. That will probably last you your hobby lifetime. And you just knock it up to the consistency you like in a little plastic palette, and you just put it all over the model. You can put it over raw if you want, and you've got working time because this stuff dries very slowly. So you put it on, leave it for say half hour, 40 minutes, and you can come back in with a makeup sponge and just start dampening that sponge with a little bit of pure thinner and just pulling it away, and it will reveal the original base coat and create these gorgeous natural transitions. And that is why I love oils. Oils also have this amazing ability where we call it the capillary effect, where you've seen those awesome videos where it looks like panel lining, where you just
I have waffled enough.
So how am I putting this on? I've got this quite the way down those recesses and cracks, and as you can see, it is running all over the place. That's what I want. I only want it to stain it, and enamels. You could knock it up thicker if you wanted to, but I've got this quite thin. And all I'm doing is I'm quite delicately doing it to start with, just to show you, but I will essentially be smothering the entire miniature in this. And as you can see, you can especially see it on the silver where it has that slightly purple tint to it. It's a gorgeous colour, this Van Dyke Brown. I highly recommend it. And I assume each brand has their own version of it. It's quite a common colour by name, but I'd imagine that there's different hues depending on the brand. And oils are not necessarily cheap. I think this tube that I'm using cost me about £12, but I'll never use it all. So I think for the amount of mileage you're going to get out of it, they're actually incredibly cheap. So I highly recommend getting into oils. I bang on about them so much, from miniature painting to prop painting, and if anyone does any cosplay, etc., they are fantastic. Now, I would slowly build up your collection of them. Start with something pretty universal. Go with a nice couple of browns, like an umber, and then maybe a black, and then just experiment from there. Find whatever colours you feel work for your army, but every so often just throw in that curveball and see what you can create with it. So I've left this guy about an hour, and the oil is dried enough that I can safely come in with a little bit of thinner on a makeup sponge and just start wicking it away. And I'm being nice and gentle, and as you can see, just as I go over the armour, it's just pulling it off and just revealing that original colour, especially if you can just see on the shoulder pad here as it turns how bright it is underneath. And it's just really effective and just a really interesting and fun way, I think, to paint miniatures. Now, I always get asked if you should varnish them. I personally don't. You do not have to, but there is a risk that you could pull the paint off. Normally this only occurs if you are being a little bit too heavy on rubbing away the oil. If you're using a nice soft sponge like a makeup sponge that I always recommend, and you can see how careful I'm being in this, then it's absolutely fine. You have to apply next to no pressure to start pulling away the paint on this. The thinner does all the work for you. So this is how I've left him after removing some of the oil. I've only left him a few hours after leaving the oil. Ideally, this is where you'd want to leave him overnight. And I'm going to start doing a few simple highlights. I'm going to use pro acrylic blue, and I'm also going to add a small amount of pastel blue. The other thing you could easily do is just put a little bit of the pastel blue on your wet palette and add some of that Talisar blue contrast, and just find that tone you want. Now, when it comes to edge highlighting these, I'm not going crazy, I'm just picking out a few points of interest because like I say, I don't want to spend forever on these guys. If you've got a box of 10 to do or a squad, you want them to look striking enough but also quick enough to get them on the battlefield. If you did really want to push it for like a hero or more of a display piece, obviously edge highlight to your heart's content and then push it with a thinner edge highlight with a little bit more of that pastel blue, and you can really make these guys stand out then. Also, when we're making slightly darker, grimier painted miniatures, don't be afraid, in my opinion, when you're doing these edge highlights, to just dab the brush along some of the sharpest edges so you get sort of a broken edge highlight. I think it looks a lot more natural than just a perfectly clean, you know, crisp edge highlight. So with the blue done, we're just going to come in with the same silver that we used to base coat it, which is the thrash metal that I used originally, and I'm just going to pick out a few of the edges. Like I said, this is meant to be quite speedy, so I'm just going to pick out a few edges just to add a little bit of interest. And I'm also going to use it on some of the Rune Lord brass areas, you know, corners of the shoulder pad, the very tips of his like batwing helmet. Another nice simple quick win we're going to go for now is Pink Horror, and we're just going to highlight over the little motifs that we did with tusk or fur. So at this stage, if you're looking at the weapon, etc., and thinking there's a lot of silver that is just sort of melding together, what I quite like to do is come in with a bit of rattling grime and just pick out a few things that I think wants to be a little bit more oily, a little bit more disgusting. So I've picked out like some of the pipe work to the heavy bolter and like the exhausty looking vent thing at the back, and just to try and add some darker, more oily, grimy areas to the gun, just to help separate it so it isn't just this big silvery blob in certain areas. You don't have to do this, but I feel it's quite a cheap and effective way to just add something extra to the heavy bolter. Next up, we are pretty much there now, so I'm just going to red the lenses, and I'm going to do corn red as a base and then just use Mephiston red over the top to make it a little bit brighter, and that's it. So the holster, I completely forgot about the little gubbins there. All I've done is taken that German grey and added a tiny bit of pastel blue just to make it a slightly cooler, lighter grey. You could easily just use Dawnstone or Administratum grey, but I'm a big fan of knocking up my own colours. And here he is with a nice simple base as well. No time at all, and I think he looks pretty effective. Thank you very much for checking out this video and supporting the channel as always. If you are new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. It helps me out massively and to help the channel grow. Hopefully I will see you on the next one.